Professor Nam-Yong Lee's commentary long, if elected public office were unpaid, could we drive out career politicians? Politics is a public mechanism designed to solve the problems of the state and society. Yet the moment elected office becomes a means of livelihood, politics is transformed into a profession, and professionalized politics easily loses its original purpose. Today, public distrust of politics in the Republic of Korea is not a matter of ideology or faction, but a matter of structure. Many citizens feel deep fatigue with a reality in which politicians boast not about which problems they have solved, but about how many terms they have served, as if tenure itself were an achievement. This fatigue stems from the entrenchment of a system in which politics is no longer service but subsistence. The question is simple. If elected public office were unpaid, could the structure of politics change? This question should be treated not as an emotional outburst, but as a matter of institutional design. When the professionalization of politics is analyzed through the lens of relational theory, the structure of stakeholders becomes clear. First are the citizens, who are both taxpayers and sovereigns. Second are elected politicians. Third are the political parties, donors, lobbying groups, interest-driven corporations, and various organizations that surround the political sphere. Fourth are the legislative and administrative authorities that design electoral systems and compensation frameworks. Fifth are the pools of potential talent considering entry into politics. The relationships among these five groups are currently fixed in a structure in which livelihood and power are fused around politicians. As long as this structure persists, politicians are more likely to become managers of their positions rather than solvers of public problems. This is precisely where politics comes to be mistaken not as a means of governing the state, but as a tool for managing personal careers. The paid nature of elected office is a core variable shaping incentives for political entry. When stable salaries and social status are guaranteed, entering politics is perceived less as public service and more as a secure career choice. Under such conditions, politicians tend to prioritize re-election prospects over policy outcomes. Rather than resolving conflicts and bringing issues to closure, managing or sustaining conflicts to mobilize supporters becomes a rational strategy. As a result, politicians choose messages and actions that are advantageous in the next election, rather than those that serve the long-term interests of the nation as a whole. This is why politics is perceived not as a resolver of conflict, but as an amplifier of it. This outcome is not a matter of individual morality, but the result of rational behavior produced by institutional design. The logic of unpaid elected office is a challenge intended to shake this very structure. When direct monetary compensation disappears, the economic incentive to enter politics is clearly weakened. The number of people who choose politics primarily for their livelihood is likely to decline. If politics is understood not as a lifelong career, but as a form of public service performed for a defined period, the motivations driving people into politics change fundamentally. For those who already possess professional expertise or a stable social foundation, political participation can be redefined not as a means of survival, but as an arena of responsibility and honor. This logic begins from the intuition that the more politics becomes a source of sustenance, the more career politicians gather, whereas when that food source disappears, only those closer to the original purpose of public service remain. This line of reasoning does not stand in complete opposition to global standards. In some countries, cultures and institutions have evolved that regard public office not as a lifelong means of livelihood, but as a civic duty. When politics functions as a form of rotational participation by members of society, rather than as the preserve of specific classes or professions, political closure and self-replication are weakened. In particular, at the level of local politics or basic councils, there are cases in which strengthening the concept of fixed-term service has simultaneously improved the quality of politics and public trust. What matters most is redefining the essence of public office, not around livelihood, but around responsibility and performance. The debate over unpaid office is the most radical device for raising this directionality. However, unpaid elected office does not automatically guarantee political reform. From an engineering perspective, complex systems are not stabilized by a single variable. Eliminating salaries removes official income channels, but it also carries the risk of creating unofficial compensation pathways. Lobbying, donations, brokerage of positions, and indirect privileges may function as new forms of reward. Moreover, an unpaid structure may operate in a way that is relatively advantageous to those who can already afford the time and costs involved. In such a case, politics could shift not from career politicians to civic servants, but from career politicians to asset-based elites. Therefore, unpaid is not an end in itself, but a means, and it cannot serve as a standalone prescription. At this point, the core issue is not the word unpaid, but the institutional design that removes incentives for career politics. From the perspective of the Federal Enterprise Architecture Framework, the compensation system for elected officials is a critical node where human resource management, public finance, law enforcement, ethics, and performance management intersect. Any intervention at this node must be accompanied by strengthened mechanisms for managing conflicts of interest and ensuring transparency. External income must be strictly limited, lobbying contacts disclosed, and the hiring of family members and close associates structurally blocked. Political finance should aim for real-time transparency rather than ex-post disclosure. Introducing unpaid office without such mechanisms would distort the system in other directions. A statistical approach helps to cool emotional debate. The share of politicians' salaries in the national budget is extremely limited. By contrast, the costs of policy failure and inefficiency caused by poor political decision-making can expand into enormous long-term social losses. If the goal is to save money by cutting salaries, the resulting decline in policy quality could cost far more. What citizens ultimately want is not lower pay for politicians, but better results. The discussion of unpaid office gains meaning only when it is combined with a structural design capable of improving outcomes, rather than serving as a purely emotional symbol. Even so, the political significance of the unpaid office argument is unmistakable. It delivers a powerful challenge to a political culture that treats elected office as a means of making a living, a culture in which re-election and multiple terms are celebrated as personal achievements obscures the true nature of public office. If politics were restructured so that individuals serve for a defined period and then return to society, the language and behavior of politicians could change. Politicians would become more conscious of their present responsibilities than of their next election. This is the most important question posed by the logic of unpaid office. Practical prescriptions must be both balanced and firm. First, compensation for elected officials should be limited to a minimum level that ensures basic livelihood, while excessive privileges are thoroughly eliminated. Second, external income and conflicts of interest must be managed under a zero-tolerance principle. Third, institutional measures should be adopted to curb incentives for career politics by easing structures of continuous re-election and monopolized candidate nomination. Fourth, a cyclical system should be institutionalized in which private sector experts can serve in public office for a defined period and then return to society. Fifth, all performance and accountability must be disclosed in data so that citizens can evaluate them directly. In conclusion, the proposal to make elected public office unpaid is not a simple debate over compensation. It is a question that re-examines the very purpose of politics. When politics becomes a means of livelihood, the state loses its direction. When politics becomes an arena of service and responsibility, the state can stand upright. Unpaid office is merely one radical tool toward that goal. The true core lies in institutional design that dismantles the structure of career politics. When this question is answered not with emotion, but with the language of science, institutions, and relationships, political reform can function as a system rather than as sentiment. Thank you for watching Professor Nam-Yong Lee's commentary, Long,